Joining me for all the chat right now, before we get to your phone calls, I'm delighted to say for the whole show's political journalist and commentator, Henry Hill. Good morning once again to you.
Good morning.
I know you've been very busy since the early hours of this morning, following all of this and doing various interviews. I mean, I suppose first question, how significant is this vote? Because we've had lots of by-elections over the years, over the decades, and either new parties or sort of fringe parties doing really well in a mid-term by-election, and everyone goes, "Oh, this is the future. Politics has changed forever." Has it?
I mean, I think you've hinted at the real slightly boring answer, which is that we won't know until we see how everything pans out, right? You think about some of those SDP smash by-election wins in the 1980s. That was it. The mould was broken, and then all of a sudden it wasn't after all. I do think that this time it might be different because we've never before had both of the major parties seem to be in quite so deep a crisis at the same time, and both of them losing votes to left and right to two radical new parties. Normally it's been sort of one or the other.
Yeah.
And so it shows, I think, a few things. One, that for the Tories, the really bad thing about this, obviously losing your deposit is always embarrassing. But it's the fact that the Reform have now clearly established that they are perfectly capable of consolidating the right-wing vote where they are the leading party. And that means that the Tories, who for a very long time have been able to say, look, we're the right-wing party that can maybe
at the end of the day,
win.
we're the one you're going to have to vote for if you don't want the others. Yeah.
I think they're losing that. And that means that in any seat where the Tories have already been pushed behind Reform, they now face the prospect of having their vote squeezed. But it also shows that the one good thing that's happened for the Tories since 2024 was the election of Zack Polanski, right? But seriously, because the Greens historically have done a bit of a Lib Dem thing, right, where they're two completely different parties in different bits of the country. In urban areas, they're this radical left-wing group, and in sort of rural areas, they're the Tories who like trees a bit more. Right, and so there were several seats.
But they're nice and cuddly.
Absolutely, and there were several seats where the Greens could potentially have picked off Tory seats for the next election. I think now that prospect has faded, and instead the Greens are turning into a much more potent threat to Labour.
Yeah.
And Labour have just been pushed into third place in their 50th safest seat.
I mean, that's the thing. This wasn't a seat that was really in the realms of the Greens realistically getting, or certainly Reform. I think it was the Reform parties in terms of their target seats, 440th out of 650. So realistically, it was a big hope they would get it. But what's really interesting about this, I mean, we'll get to sort of what the Green Party in Hannah Spencer and the winning candidate in just a moment. But in terms of for Keir Starmer, look, there's a lot of question marks being made. Given now, Carl Turner, Labour MP, who's very, he's been on the show a lot. He's been on lots of media this morning. He's talking about this as a catastrophic result. But at the end of the day, there's this view that if Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, hadn't been stopped from running for the seat, he wants to return to Parliament to basically challenge Keir Starmer for the leadership, he would have won. If he'd been the candidate and he hadn't been blocked by Keir Starmer, very specifically, he would have won this seat. Now, I think that's a big question mark. He's a popular figure. He's a well-known figure in Manchester. And, of course, Gorton and Denton is in Manchester, Greater Manchester. I think, given the scale of anger against Keir Starmer at the moment, I would question that, but the decision was taken. Even if he won that by-election, we're going to then face an election for the Greater Manchester Mayor without the popular figure of Andy Burnham. But also the fact that they went completely for this sort of binary election campaign, which is it's us or Reform, and if you want to stop Reform, you've got to vote for us. They barely mentioned the Greens. Meanwhile, there are the Greens coming up on the left, absolutely knocking them out of the park. Almost 15,000 votes. And whereas the Reform Party got 10,500 votes.
I mean, essentially, Gorton and Denton is a very strange seat in that half of it is essentially a Labour Reform battleground and half of it is a Labour Green battleground.
Yeah.
And maybe, actually, if Labour had been a bit more shameless and they'd gone around the Reform bit being like, look, it's us or the Greens, right? It's us or those lunatics.
They did on two separate campaigns.
Right, but they actually can't. And I think this is a big problem for Labour, is that despite the threat that Reform still does pose to them, and I think there are some people saying, actually, the real problems the Greens know, both of them are serious threats, they just can't bring themselves to campaign at Reform voters. But I think on the Burnham thing, one, you're completely right about the fact that if he had stood, I think he probably would have won, not for certain, but
no.
They'd have had that mayoral vacancy. But two, what would that have changed? We'd have had a government which only won a by-election by essentially running a candidate who was an anti-prime ministerial candidate in the seat. And also, Andy Burnham doesn't have any answers, right? I think this is the important thing to remember. Andy Burnham, it's easy to be popular when you're a devolved politician who does not have responsibility for pensions, the NHS, social care, immigration.
Spend more on this or that, Prime Minister. Yeah.
the public, if Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister, the public will go off him just as quickly as they've gone off Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, indeed. The other interesting thing is this move from everybody, it's the unions or backbench MPs saying the answer is you've got to go to the left. Labour have been, they say, lurching to the right. I've yet to see any evidence of this, but lurching to the right to take on reform. They say, no, the answer is actually going to the left. But this is the thing. The Tories face this challenge from the right, from reform. Labour are facing a challenge from reform on the right and from the Greens on the left. They are being squeezed absolutely down the middle.
Absolutely. This is the thing. Whenever someone says, actually, you see this a lot since last night's results, like they've been focusing on reform, and actually they should be focusing on the Greens. It's like, no. The Greens are a serious problem, but reform is still a serious problem. But the other thing is, people forget about the Tories, understandably.
Well, they did. I mean, they did at this election. They lost their deposits.
This is, I went to University of Manchester. Manchester Gorton has never been a seat where the Tories really feature. But if you think about it, there's a lot of voters, centrist voters, who voted Tory in 2019 and switched to Labour in 2024. The more Labour pivots left to focus on the Green Party, not only does it risk alienating voters to reform, but it also risks alienating voters in those sort of shirey seats that it won last time. Absolutely.
Just some breaking news in relation to Manchester, and it was something that was brought up by, even in the speech actually, that Hannah Spencer gave the winning Green candidate in the by-election. Darren Connor, who's 55 years old, has been charged with the possession of an offensive weapon and possession of Class B drugs. This is after reports of a man armed with an axe entered Manchester Central Mosque during Ramadan prayers. That's according to Greater Manchester Police. Big concern about that. Thankfully, no one hurt. Let's have a watch and a listen of Hannah Spencer. She's, working class, plumber, local girl, absolutely lovely. For some reason, has a haircut of a 5-year-old girl. I'm sorry, I know. I mean, all people in the world to talk about their hair. Me. I mean, come on.
I can't.
But you can. But I mean, I'm sure if you did have more hair, you'd style it better than her and me. But I do just it's like I just don't understand. You're a grown lady in your 30s. Why you got a hairdo like you're 5? But anyway, she gave a victory speech, and this is what Hannah Spencer had to say.
Working hard. What does that get you? Because talk to anyone here and they will tell you. The people who work hard but can't put food on the table, can't get their kids' school uniforms, can't put their heating on, can't live off the pension they worked hard to save for, can't even begin to dream about ever having a holiday, ever. Because life has changed. Instead of working for a nice life, we're working to line the pockets of billionaires.
I mean, it just ticked every box there, didn't it, Henry? Working to line the pockets of billionaires. And this is interesting. She was, local girl, made good. A lot of talk about, actually, she's a plumber. But, is she a bit of a hypocrite? She drives a petrol car. She goes away on foreign holidays when green policies are opposed to both those things. They're also opposed to private landlords and second homeowners. And she's a second homeowner. Her mum helped her buy her first home. You kind of got to wonder about how consistent these people are. But I mean, when she says, what does working hard get you? The reality is, of course, the green policies. And if you haven't had a look, have a look at my Twitter feed. We've got a column in The Sun today. I think it's a good thing that this election victory has come to the Greens. I genuinely think it's a good thing. The reason why I think it is, rather than any other party winning, is it's a wake-up call to everyone about who the Greens are, because this, to me, is exactly the same as the BNP doing well in European elections with Nick Griffin becoming an MEP back in 2009. And there was an absolute outcry when they decided to invite him on Question Time, the BBC. And everyone go, this is awful, it'll just boost support for him. No, it didn't. When people actually saw him, they heard his views, they actually looked at BNP policies. OK, they did better in the 2010 general election than they'd done in the 2005 general election, but it was still about 1 or 2%, and then they didn't win any seats and they completely collapsed. What we need for the Green Party is to stop treating them like they're some nice little tree huggers in the corner. They are a dangerous bunch. I call them communists on ketamine. That is what they are. They are a dangerous bunch of extremists. We have this talk about all our extremist policies in this parties in this country. The Greens are an extremist party. Their immigration policy, no borders, no deportations. Anyone who wants to come here can come here and get a free home and be given universal basic income. Wealth taxes, well, the money's gone within 5 minutes, folks. Net zero, not by 2050, unachievable, unaffordable, undesirable, by 2040. That will only be done by you ain't allowed to fly, you ain't allowed to drive a car, you ain't allowed to eat meat, you can't heat your home with central heating you've got right now. Legalising all drugs, including heroin. I mean, this is properly insane stuff. Legalising prostitution. Basically completely anti-Israel policies, Gaza and Palestine, completely and utterly aligning themselves with the most bitter, dangerous sectarian politics in this country, which is, I would say, the pro-Palestinian, supposedly, it's actually just anti-Israel, anti-Jew movement in this country. What do you make of the claims that Nigel Farage said that this result was a victory for sectarian voting and cheating? After we had the claims from and it was an independent body. They were allowed to stand in polling stations because, they are literally allowed to do that because they are an independent body. And they, watching what was going on, they said, and this is Democracy Volunteers, that they've seen the highest levels of family voting at an election in our 10-year history of observing elections in the UK. So they're there watching, and they're seeing basically more than one family member going into a voting booth, pulling the curtain, and the vote is happening. Now, that is a criminal offence in this country. We're told by the people running these polling stations, that that's not what happened, but they have 2 observers in each station, and they said it happened in the majority of stations, and basically they ain't seen nothing like it.
So, obviously, there's no reason, prima facie, to not take Democracy Volunteers seriously. They are a respected independent group. They're run by an academic, and they're allowed in by the Electoral Commission. They're not some crank group of people who just turn up at polling stations.
Yeah, you wouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the interesting thing about this is that the family voting in polling stations is simply a small part of the problem that, for a very long time, has been postal votes.
Yes.
Right? Because postal voting was originally a very, very rare thing, and it was for invalids and people who literally couldn't leave the house, servicemen,
people who were travelling,
servicemen overseas and so on. And now it's just become it's more convenient, right? But there's no secret ballot in the home, right? And so I think that actually what surprises me about this, and to be fair, I've not read in full Democracy Volunteers report. I don't want to make too definitive a claim about it, but what surprises me about this is just that these people are bothering to go and do it at the polling station.
Yeah.
Actually, because it's so easy now, in the way that we conduct our democracy, to do this kind of thing at home. I do think it's concerning that Manchester Council's staff are flatly contradicting Democracy Volunteers.
And Nigel Farage is saying this was happening in Muslim areas. Now, Gorton is where there's a large Muslim population and student population, and Denton. These 2 seats have almost nothing in common, and Denton is more of a sort of older, white working class population, and that's where it's happening. But the reality is, I've been covering elections for a very, very long time. In every single, whether it's a by-election, a council election, a general election, where we have seen worth taking serious allegations of either postal vote anomalies or this sort of, coercing, should we say, organising of how people in your family vote, people, the dead voting, whatever. Invariably, it's in Labour seats, and it's in seats which have a very high population who their heritage is from the Indian subcontinent. So it's not just, people say it's Muslims, it's not Muslims, it's Pakistanis, it's Indians, it's Bangladeshis. Now, why is that an issue? It's because these are 3 countries that ostensibly have democracy, but massively corrupt democracies, where corruption is absolutely the norm, where sectarian voting is absolutely the norm, where the head of the family directing how you vote, absolutely the norm. And that has simply been imported to our country. Now, people can say, oh, that's racist. No, if it was a load of Australians doing it, I'd call it out just the same. The problem exists in particular areas for a particular reason, and it is entirely related to importing corrupt practices from other countries. And if we're not going to recognise that, you're not going to call it out, we're not going to be able to deal with it.